Hello, dear colleagues. We are very glad to greet you in this room, just like always. Here, very fruitful discussions are happening and fundamental, I would like to say, discussions. Today we are going to talk about the anniversary of the Budapest Memorandum. My name is Viktor Szlinczak. I'm head of management of the Institute of World Policy, and I would like to introduce our guests who will participate in today's panel. That is, ladies first. Olga Butkevich, President of Ukrainian Association of International Law, Doctor of Law, Professor of the Cátedra of International Law University named after Taras Shevchenko. Pavlo Klimkin, Senior Researcher, and again, in 2014-2019, he was the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, and, well, actually, the host of the room, Valery Chali, had chairman of the board of Ukrainian Crisis Media Center, and member of Association of International Law, Ambassador of Ukraine in the USA 2015-2019. In order to start our discussion in a dynamic way, I would like to start it traditionally with a short blitz questioning. I'd like to address the participants. Please answer in 20 seconds one phrase. Provide your response. So Budapest Memorandum is, first, the tool that's not working. Political promise, second. Third, the biggest diplomatic illusion of the 90s. Fourth, lost window of opportunities. What is Budapest Memorandum in your understanding? Ms. Olga, please. Until today, international agreement which is still functioning, which is violated, and the consequence of that has to be taken into account again, and we have to learn some lessons from that, by Ukraine primarily. Mr. Pavlo, it's a memorandum for me. And everything that is coming out of that, politically and legally. Okay, but you have not selected an option from the list. Yeah, the tool that's not working, the promise, the biggest illusion of the 90s, or a lost window of opportunities. I think it's not a tool. It's not a promise. Well, at least if you dive back into the 90s, the story that was not fulfilled. It's a subjective discussion, and in my opinion, the memorandums in general were and remain memorandums, Okay, we will discuss about this topic some more later on. Mr. Valeri. Yeah, the easiest thing for me. Colleagues said many things. 20 seconds. It's an agreement, but it's not completed. The procedures, if it would have been written correctly, the procedure should have been different, and we can talk about the nature of it, but it remains a political declaration as of today. Is that a tool? Well, potentially it is. I can even prove that we can still use it today, but in the opinion of citizens, well, it's the lesson when the words about the guarantees of safety on paper did not become real guarantees for the country. Okay, so now we will come to the second question of our blitz, and that will be regarding such a question. If you would have been able to return to 1994, would you advise to sign this memorandum? First option, yes, but in different form. Second option, no, we should have demanded some different guarantees. Option 3, yes, because there was no other chance. Option 4, categorically not. Okay, let us start with Pavlo this time. Second. Okay, that is no, we should have negotiated more. Olga, 4, taking into account 20 seconds for explanation. So today, we have examples when Ukraine, well, from Ukraine it is demanded to accept certain positions that maybe will be beneficial for Ukraine one day. But as of today, they are not beneficial in terms of safety. Maybe once, for some other epoch, it was economically viable and good and beneficial, but today, for sure, not. Okay, we will discuss that later. And Mr. Valeri? Well, on the stage of 1994, before the meeting in Moscow, where, well, negotiate for some other options. But on the stage when they wanted somehow to have these obligations, they should have written some more clear documents with the elements of control of its performing. Now we will come to a very thin ice, I would say it this way, and the question that is always asked by most Ukrainians: who is guilty in the fact that memorandum did not work? First option, Ukrainian diplomats of the 90s. Second option, the USA. Third option, Great Britain. Fourth option, Russia. Fifth option, international security system as such. Mr. Valeri, now you are the first one. Well, primarily, that is, the establishment of Ukraine was not ready. I mean, people's deputies at the time, that is what we were mentioning, they were not ready to negotiate. So, I would say that Anton Zdenko and Leonid Kravchuk, again, well, it was mentioned sincerely, so I will say, what do you mean, who's the guilty, because maybe we could have done that differently. We could have negotiated real things, not just to get the paper, مثلا. Well, it didn't function after some time, right? So I think that it's the regional system of safety that was ruined. That is fifth option. Okay, Mr. Pavlo. Well, that was made at the beginning of the 90s, right? And at the beginning of the 90s, the reality, if we look around, well, it was totally different. And neither we nor those who were supporting us, nor those who wanted us to be gone, well, nobody could imagine the reality that will be there like 10 years after. So that means that concluding any political agreements all over the world, well, it has no sense. No one should believe in that. But back then it was considered that it's not this way. Okay, now I offer us to analyze in more depth the things that happened. And well, and I saved into my notes today the phrase of one of the people's deputies who wrote, the 31st anniversary of signing the Budapest Memorandum, we should be sincere that back then Ukraine consciously was misleaded. So I would like to address Ms. Olha first of all. Can you please explain us whether the memorandum at that moment was politically obliging to something? Let us recall first of all what was the period when the Budapest Memorandum was concluded, because the 90s is quite a specific period of time. I will not repeat this because I've been quoting that for multiple times, and the practices of the diplomats and lawyers, international lawyers, politicians from different countries, that is the USA and Ukraine and European countries. Well, what did we say in the 90s? The Cold War came to an end. UN Security Council is not paralyzed by veto. They are unblocked. Their work is unblocked. There is no more two powers fighting for the world, right? The world switched from bipolar to the world of equal opportunities, etc., etc. By the way, those are direct quotes. And in these conditions, Ukraine is imposed with the document of a doubtful quality, to be honest. And this document, well, according to this, well, again, it was very easy to explain to the electorate that we won't use those weapons, but we had the weapons and give it away. Why? Again, another question we can raise here, about the weapons that Ukraine just gave away or sold to Russia afterwards. I mean, nuclear weapons. So if we take the 90s, it's a general illusion of ending the Cold War. It's general illusion that, as a matter of fact, there is no more. Another quote, by the way, the threat of the Third World War disappeared. The threat of the world nuclear conflict disappeared. Why do we need nuclear weapons, right? How they are explaining that to people. Like, why do we need nuclear weapons if we are living in such a world of common development? So when talking about Budapest Memorandum, we have to remember about the context. We have to remember about the period. What do we have today, right? We have the exit of the countries from those agreements that were there, like the forbidding to use certain types of weapons, etc., etc. So again, maybe something that was concluded with Russian Federation, but not only. So now, obviously, we have totally different stage, different period. Of course, the Cold War didn't come to an end. And it is clear that it continued and it continues still. And the brief break, I mean, the Cold War, it existed, and then this kind of decisions were promoted. Well, they were beneficial to some persons, than many things, but in order to weaken Ukraine during that period. So when we are talking about the possibility of concluding a different agreement and guarantees, well, we would have concluded different agreement. Okay, the guarantees would have been written differently. The procedure of ratification may be clearly written. By the way, the Vienna Convention doesn't say that identification is necessary. It doesn't say that, well, the word memorandum of the name of the agreement is impacting something. But, well, we had the fact that this document was imposed on Ukraine, and it's totally not beneficial for Ukraine. And we can do nothing with that. I will repeat myself one more time. Maybe we will repeat to this, because now Ukraine has to take into account this lesson. Because, again, we are talking about the guarantees of safety. Thank you, Mr. Valery. As a person who probably you have read the text when it was prepared. What was offered, what was written, and what was meant. Why different readings of the memorandum have started, what we are talking about. First of all, I'm not the person who saw the preparation. It's Alexander Chali, the same surname, but at the time he was working on the document. Pavlo Anatolievich, maybe, I don't remember whether you were there during that time. Okay, so it's question to Glinkin. I was on the stage when the application of the document. I can just tell you that the document was used first when I was deputy minister in 2009. So with the initiative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, we sent letters to confirm the guarantees. We received responses. I saw the responses of the two, as a matter of fact, even three countries, because Russia, the USA, and Great Britain, confirmation of guarantees in terms of provision, guarantees from nuclear attack. That is, and it's very important, nobody has changed that. All these countries, and then in two different ways, the Republic of China joined that. So even till today, they didn't refuse, because Russia, except for Russia de facto, I don't believe in their words. They are also claiming that, but they are confirming, all of them are confirming one guarantee, So they said, we will not attack Ukraine with nuclear weapons. It used to be very cynical, but taking into account the situation that we are in when Russia is threatening us the nuclear weapons, already we can take this, we can start working with that. Geneva. In Geneva, there were negotiations in the format of a Budapest Memorandum. twice. Then somebody says that, okay, we refuse to have that. And here I would like to mention, I'm categorically against, because we visited that meeting of the UN Security Council where, well, there was an obligation, like, to the Minister of Foreign Affairs, Pavlo Klimkin, to send offers to conduct such consultations one more time. Unfortunately, back then we did not get the confirmation from the participants that we are ready to move on in this direction. So as a matter of fact, since then, in spite of the attempts to, again, there were no attempts to address them. I can't say which versions were there and how they were changed. I will say just one phrase. What I know for sure is that the document could have been better or worse, etc. Yeah, I wanted to ask that. No. Just understand one thing. Basic things happened before. In January in Moscow, when Ukraine agreed to give the nuclear weapon. And we didn't fight for keeping some part of that in order to destroy that in Ukraine. I'm not talking about giving everything to Russia, but to destroy the tactical, like even ammunition in Ukraine. That was the moment where we could have found some way to, again, join the group of non-dissemination of nuclear weapons. Again, it's another part of obligations in Budapest Memorandum. There was a moment where we could have been in different status. We could have joined in different status. But at that moment, again, the archive of Ministry of Foreign Affairs has that. But not so long ago, and I was reminded of that personally by a very famous Senator Lugar, reminded that you are sending letters, you have a hunger, you need money. And he said just one thing: I'm so surprised how you continue. We have such letters. Okay, let us start with that. Mr. Pavlo, so could Ukraine demand more? Of course. However, the reality was who wanted to defend whom and from whom. Back then, Ukraine didn't really kind of deny the Russian impact. That was recognized by the West. That was obvious for Moscow. That was quite obvious for us from the point of view where we were at the time. And if we are demanding some other guarantees, what kind of guarantees and from whom? I always tell about my discussions. I had some discussions, 2 discussions with Mr. Kravchuk, by the way. One was regarding this. Later on, already this discussion happened in 2005, I think. I can even recall the year. So, actually, the question was about what they were using as a guidance when they were working with that. And they said, like, what else could we imagine for ourselves? So that is, these guarantees for them actually were part of the package, not the main idea. And the main idea was Russian and American aid. And when we are saying, like, maybe we could have kept the nuclear weapons, well, actually, we had 2 important components: tactic and strategy. All the tactic, I will remind you, because maybe somebody doesn't remember, all the tactical things we gave away in 1992 from the point of view of technological. To take care and do the maintenance of tactical weapons, it's much easier than strategy, So we can move on with the tactic. It is extremely expensive. It requires some elements of nuclear cycle, but the one that we could theoretically, I would like to underline that theoretically we could have created that. And third thing, we had to cope with the pressure. I would like to clarify, are we talking about dozens and hundreds of thousands, millions, billions? How much Well, I didn't know what the amount, because the calculations were different. I'm not gonna kind of speculate on that, but we were talking about billions. And that was the amount that seemed to the management of Ukraine absolutely fantastic. I heard like 40 billion, I heard 50 billion, different amounts. But I can't neither confirm nor kind of deny. So in 1992, all the tactics that could have been the element of kind of stopping that, and theoretically it is easier to maintain if we step aside from the logics of political pressure. So all of that was taken from Ukraine. Based on which agreements? I don't know. That still remains in the history of Ukraine a certain white spot, I will say it this way. And as a matter of fact, we received like a certain number of nuclear fuel for that, and it was totally not balanced in terms of money, but somebody has to calculate that, somebody who can calculate that. So when the negotiations started in general about like joining and about the Budapest Memorandum, about like first starts, etc., we had no tactical weapons. Those were negotiations only about strategy in two dimensions. Accordingly, nuclear and the carriers, because everybody knows how much we had. We had the mines and some other things, so who's interested, you can read about that. As for the strategy, I can say, as a person who knows physics perfectly well, so to support the strategy, we had no resources. We had to develop that. So these elements required quite significant investments, both intellectual and financial, however, for the whole country, I would say. So it's like I am bringing us to the basics of this story. Second thing, from the point of view of the approach, like what actually we needed, right? So Mr. Valeri said, by the way, I saw the letters, and Mr. Kravchuk, well, he recognized that he wrote the letters. Yeah, we have them in the archive of Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Like, we need practical aid, we are in a critical situation, and we lack, well, as a matter of fact, we lack things that can save us from destabilization, and that's actually certain food products. So this logic was the dominating one in negotiations, not the logics for preservation, etc., but this logics. And for this logics, actually, that is what we were negotiating for. And the third moment, I've been talking a lot to Americans afterwards, those who were responsible for all of this, like logics of nuclear, kind of like getting rid of nuclear weapons. Those were like senators and people who were responsible for that in Pentagon, State Department, etc., their logics was like, we didn't take care about the guarantees. Who should have attacked Ukraine? We thought that, everything came to an end. Like, we don't really need Ukraine, so the main thing is for Ukraine to be stable. If you remember, 31 years ago, in the world, there were 9 nuclear countries, officially and non-officially. As of today, also 9 nuclear countries. And Americans were always okay with that. That might change quickly, and it is changing during these months and weeks. So the wave of dissemination, we will have that. We are living in totally different reality, and we can talk about that separately. However, what I want to say is the management of Ukraine back then, they did not understand what they should want out of that. They had totally different priorities, and the priority of guarantees was not something that was priority number 1, priority number 2, or priority number 3. Now let us model that. So we have Mr. Kravchuk, who in his previous reincarnation was, well, again, in the Communist Party, he was responsible for ideology. That's what I wanted to tell you. Yeah, so we have Mr. Kravchuk and his team, no matter what is our attitude to them, because it comprised very different people. So what can he say? Say that we want to get the path to NATO when we are in Russian field of impact and NATO sees us like this. Well, he could have said that, or maybe he could have said that, like, understanding who he is and where he is. Like, my answer is no. Very easy. People around him, well, I was told a bit different story by other people. Like, they try to persuade Kravchuk. Again, this discussion in 2005, it was very long, but Kravchuk said that it's not even an issue for a discussion. So the text that was written, by the way, I did not work on the text, even though back then I've been working on the issues of getting rid of nuclear weapons, but it was the issue of the first start, not the Budapest Memorandum, as far as I understand, and the text was also written not by us. If you read that from the point of view of legal formulations, it was written by others. So somebody put that on our head, somebody put that on Russia's head, and I understand that in Russia there were some other thoughts in other schools, so it's a special story, I would say. So when we are trying to look at the meaning of this text and why it is like that and why it is memorandum, why didn't we insist on the fact that this memorandum to be ratified? For it to obtain some legal status. Mr. Buteyko told me the story that kind of there was such a discussion, and he was told, like, just forget about that because it will never work. And no one ever, as he told me, no one ever raised this topic again during the negotiations. That is what I recall from the point of view of approach and how I understand the reality of beginning of the 90s. And this topic, like the last thing I'm gonna say, and then I just stop. Okay, Mr. Valeri said that, and it's very interesting because both politically and legally, we were trying to get the Budapest format. We were trying to get that, like, not just after 2014. We had, and we still have such attempts. We have all of that in our archives, and there are some diplomatic notes and some applications. Americans were responding, and Brits were not, and we had some meetings in the trilateral format. And, well, again, there are some other things in the archive that are very interesting. I won't quote that word to word, but I will tell you about the senses that are in there. Actually, Ukraine violated Budapest Memorandum because we organized it. Because the Maidan was organized. I will not tell you the exact wording, but I'm not mistaken in the census. I guarantee that is the note, which, by the way, those are Russians who repeated that multiple times. So this story was, well, speculated on, and actually there are many Russian responses who is perceiving and how the Budapest Memorandum in terms of legal approach. Okay, thank you very much for your response. I saw that, well, there was response from Mr. Valeri to some thesis, and in parallel I would like still to ask you when you had this moment, Anne, and when it became obvious that memorandum doesn't work. Oh, let me start. It didn't work from the very beginning. We are talking about that, actually, that, yeah, it is some side, well, yeah, Americans, okay, Americans who did that, and Russians were, well, again, they couldn't do everything back then. Again, I would like to add to what was mentioned. 1992, difficult, complicated situation, and Kravchuk sending the letter, like the president of Ukraine sending the letter to the president of the USA, help us for like $400 million, I think, with goods. Do you remember Russia was receiving some like chicken, and Ukraine also received, because we will have famine. Well, I lived during those years, and everybody was surviving, 1992. But saying that we will have some famine and we shouldn't think of the future and guarantees of safety. I think it's, the priority of safety after we got finally out of the Soviet Union, safety had to be crucial, and the responsibility is on many politicians who were weak during that moment, I can say it so, and they focused on development of current issues because in 1994, what I was told by different participants, Ukraine wanted, well, maybe I am mistaken, but that's what I heard, Ukraine wanted somehow to strengthen that because Americans didn't want to sign anything at all. And Ukraine wanted to have at least somehow it documented. And according to the words who were working on rocket issues, we even had some limitations in terms of the rockets or missiles. We had to get rid of that as well. So finally, at the end, we could preserve some missiles. So we had the missile program. But it's a totally different period. In the moment when this document emerged, well, I don't know. I will not comment on the fact what could have been done, but we see that, there was no perfection. And I would rather say it this way. If it isn't perfect, it's better not to do that. Take the pause and have the opportunity to do something in the future. I'm about the tactical nuclear weapons because it was stolen from Ukraine when central Ukrainian authorities were not controlling the process. So it was made, just believe us, because in Ukraine Crisis Media Center, we've held 5 to 7 discussions already on this issue. So I would like us to talk today about the legal aspects. But yeah, we've discussed that already. Just read different positions. Position of Yuri Kostenko in the book, there's one position because he thinks very harsh that many people have to be brought to liability. And here in the room we have people who were voting deputies of that were voting back then. I made my own conclusion. The central authorities were not controlling all of that. Or maybe they just allowed Moscow to take the nuclear weapons from Ukraine. That is first. We've discussed that already. When we are talking about strategic nuclear weapons, we could have delayed their transitioning to Russia. We could have done that. In my subjective opinion, again, I read all the conditions. Back then, there were some opportunities to control and develop. And well, we had no opportunity to do the testing of nuclear weapons, what Leonid Kuchma said. We don't even have the polygon. I agree with that, because after Chernobyl, there was a lot of different things, but we are talking about other. We missed. So today, there was one thing mentioned, and I've never heard that before. The mistake was in setting the priorities in terms of growth and development of the country, because the management of the country decided that survival of the nation is to feed, because, yeah, it's a story about the famine. And very often it happened that our country suffered from famine. And if in 1991 and 1992, that was a window of opportunities. If we would have set up the priority of safety, and also if we would have had the political leadership, which is not communistic or post-communistic, well, then we could have discussed some other options up to the possibility to join the system of collective safety of Europe. Hypothetically, but that was the biggest opportunity. Yeah, before 2008. So the mistake that we should not do, safety first. All other things go after that. Second moment, diplomatically, Ukraine can work together with big countries only in combination with the support of other countries, with discussions of all of that inside of the country. So if the parliament would have been engaged, not on the last stage already, but if it would have been discussed in memoirs everybody's writing, there are some questions about how that happened in Ukrainian parliament. Is that mandatory, this document for us nowadays, if Russia violated that? I want to discuss this moment as well. Maybe Ukraine should just check on our obligations, because back then we obliged to join the group of non-dissemination of nuclear weapons. And now, in a crazy tempo, this system is destroyed. I'm not saying to leave it, but let us just talk about that at least, that Ukraine undertook the obligations. Right? So basic issue is nuclear disarmament, no matter how that is happening, and no compensation except for the program for liquidation. That was American program indeed, and except for these 400 millions. That's it. Why? You were asking for numbers. Well, no one's gonna tell you the numbers, but the rockets, the missiles destroyed by the 43rd, like Army, Nemediev and Siege, 4 missiles. 2 were directed to Washington and 2 to New York. Americans were trying to ensure their safety because they were afraid that in the condition when Ukraine is still in transitioning period, they were afraid that still there might be some kind of chaos and that won't be control. And they mistakenly thought that Russia is going to be more stable and that it's going to be more, it's not the aggressor, they are more calm. However, it turned out that it's a catastrophic mistake because in the same storages they could have had under their international control on our territory for like 7 years and just liquidated there. And as a result, they have, and the carriers are gone, like strategic carriers of the weapons, they are now shelling us. And they made a huge mistake. And now, partially, they are recognizing. Bill Clinton recognized that it was probably a mistake. And the main thing for us to understand, now we are at the same point. New stage, but same point. And now Americans are telling us again, Trump's administration in this peace-building process, the safety guarantees at the end. First. Second, they are not going to be ratified in the Congress. What kind of document it is? Again, we don't know. Europeans, Macron, last week, offered, after returning from China, he wants to talk about what are the safety guarantees for Ukraine. We are already taught that the document by itself, no matter how it is called, I think it looks like the, again, political and legal document. And, well, yeah, I respect Ms. Aliha, and as international law, I can say for sure you are correct. We don't need ratification, but also Pavlo is correct, because from the point of view of perception of the diplomatic tools, it's the political and legal tool. And in diplomatic practice, the name matters. Well, it's not like the Vienna Convention says that any name should be considered. If it would have been so, then our safety agreement won't be called compact. It would have been treaty, but they are naming the compact. So that's it. So the name matters. And ending up my speech, we have lots of lessons here. We have to end up with kind of feeling sorry for that. And as it was mentioned in one of the questionnaires, like you remember 5 questions from authorities, Mr. Zelensky, the aim is to show that it's just a paper. No, it's not the right logic. So it should not show that it is just a paper. We should analyze what can we do in order to omit such mistakes, and what else can we use from this agreement. And I am confident that we should raise the issue because it's a huge mistake. We address the parliament to conduct the listening, the committee to conduct the listening. Nobody wants to do that. Nobody. That is the only platform nowadays in Ukraine, here and now, where we are discussing this topic. Nobody, 5th of December, nobody even recalls about that, and it's wrong because we have to remember the difficult lessons learned and make some conclusions. And we did not draw any conclusions because we are discussing same guarantees of safety in approximately same way. Well, the memorandum did not work because nobody knew how to use that. But I would like here to ask Ms. Ola, because Mr. Pavlov said that some document was kind of given to us, most probably written in the USA, and then discussions started. So what was there? Guarantees or some insurance. And this interpretation of words, well, again, there was a lot of it brought a lot of different interpretations. So a specialist in international law, can you tell us what was it? Well, actually, we are not talking about the terminology that much, not that much in terminology, not that much about insurances or guarantees, right? I come back to the legal point of view, right? In international law, we can say that this memorandum is written poorly. It could have been written better. It could have been written with a different procedure of adoption via ratification, etc. And if that is like, maybe it could have been a treaty, not the memorandum. But what do we have as of today in international law? We have thousands of wonderful norms and conventional norms, agreement norms, etc. If we take like any of the articles, as a matter of fact, there is nothing to be changed. If you take like any article of the Charter or the rules for armed conflicts or international humanitarian law, there are some outdated things that might make the upgrade just from the point of view of scientific and technical progress, because some new forms of some new weapons of war are emerging. What is the problem? What is international law based on, diplomacy based on, and as a matter of fact, the system of international safety based on, if there are some guarantees, if there are some insurances and agreement, and if something is agreed between the parties, we have to stick to it. We have to use that. So the principle of faithful behavior, right? But what if the country is violating the memorandum? What if they would have violated the treaty ratified by all the parties? Well, but we have the big agreement with Russia existing still in some part. Yeah, by the way, I wanted to bring in an example. We have lots of those agreements. Everything is based on the, principle of being faithful. And it means that we don't need the certain quantity of norms or what the norms are, but how they are guaranteed, how their application is guaranteed. So Budapest Memorandum is just an example of disadvantage of that principle, Can I ask one question just to clarify? Why Ukraine didn't go to the courts, any of the courts, regarding the guarantees that were in this memorandum? Was this practice possible even? Well, as a lawyer, just tell us, where should have we submitted the claim, if that is possible? Well, in this case, we are coming back to the form of the document, because we are coming back to the form of the document indeed, and I would like to mention, because many things were told today about the fact that, we are talking about guarantees, and that Ukrainian party was not paying attention to guarantees that much. Let us read the text. There is another wonderful phrase. These parties are obliged not to cause economical pressure and not to, we can take a look at that, not to cause economic pressure to Ukraine. What do we see today? Let us recall, the recent agreements concluded, and the possibility of certain economic possibilities that potentially might be included to the so-called agreement and guarantees, etc., for the future. I'm repeating this word for the third or even more times, the lesson that has to be learned from Budapest Memorandum, because indeed we have absolutely same position, same situation right now as in the 90s. Well, I did not participate in, it's different from my colleagues, I did not participate in decision-making, but there was no situation like either PAMEN or Budapest Memorandum. The priorities were set not correctly. Just like today, we have the wrong priorities. When in Ukraine, the rhetoric about peace and ending of war. Well, I have a question. Ending of war. Are all territories deoccupied? Have we returned our military captives? So it's just peace that remains? It remains just to end the war? So again, we are in the situation when Ukraine, well, again, gets just some vivid conditions. Well, it's good that we are talking about guarantees with our allies, and I think some guarantees for 100 of years in international law. This practice ended 300 years ago in the mid of 17th century, and since then, well, no one is concluding the agreements for 100 years, etc. But it's good. It's victory of Ukrainian diplomats, or it's a big benefit to bilateral relationship with that country. But in terms of guarantees for Ukrainian safety, it's about nothing. So can Ukraine go to court? Let us read. Let us read what are the obligations of Ukraine according to the memorandum. What is the situation as of today, and what the situation that we had back then? Because, well, it was concluding the agreement for the sake of concluding the agreement. Well, the text was not well read and not proofread, and, well, was it constructed to be the legal document? Thank you very much, Mr. Pavlo. You mentioned 2014 and the evaluation that was made by, the words that were told about Maidan by Russians included. But at that moment, after the revolution of dignity, could we engage, like USA, maybe even China, to forcing Russia act in line with what is written in the memorandum? Well, you know the answer. Actually, they had their political will. They were doing something that they decided to do. Significant part of Western world, maybe excluding some non-critical players, they decided that the reality back then is, first of all, not serious and not for long, secondly. And that they need to freeze it somehow in order to achieve the new status quo. Significant part of Western world was not ready from the very beginning for any sanctions, even after the plane that was hit, and even the first sanctions from the European Union. Well, the 3rd of September 2014. After that, well, different things were done. But in a broader sense, I will say that carefully. It's my point of view. I think that we don't care what is the form of Budapest Memorandum is nowadays. Is that a treaty agreement, etc.? Because Russia didn't just violate the memorandum. They violated the bilateral agreements. It is the agreement. So, well, maybe the memorandum was not violated in 2003, for example, but during the Orange Revolution, not. So we have a lot of different examples. So I think that no matter what is the form of the document, even if it is ratified, even if, in spite of the fact that I would like to have some ratification, some story about that, but it's not a guarantee in a modern world where international law doesn't work. And, well, at least in this way it won't work. And that means that any safety obligations or guarantees have to be strengthened with something. Just like when you're given some credit, right? A loan, it is guaranteed by something. It's a collateral or some guarantees or some things. So there should be guarantees, so to say, because the guarantees themselves in today's reality are, as a matter of fact, the declaration. It doesn't matter whether that is legal declaration, etc. In today's story, well, there is Article 5 NATO that is functioning, and we have understanding that some players have that Article 5 is functioning. And it has to remind you of something, you know? As for like nuclear issues, but it's not always about like non-nuclear protection again. So these discussions, even though very careful, they are inside of the NATO happening. And if that is happening, who will believe in the guarantees that are written or not written? We can write it here or there. And I would not have discussions about the legal form. Yeah, about any way of guarantees, because of course the better it is, the better. If it's agreement, cool, ratified, great, we will be happy. But even if that's gonna be an agreement in the future, it's gonna be ratified, and as of today, unfortunately, we have huge doubts regarding that. Well, still, it is not a strong guarantee that in some sense we will get support. That is the reality. And we have to act based on the fact that maybe in nuclear sphere, what is called nuclear kind of holding on, well, it is very important, because if we go beyond this framework, it means to destabilize everything that is around us. But when we are talking about the non-nuclear, it doesn't exist anymore. And based on that, we have to demand not the texts and their form, like international and legal form, but something where there should be three things. I always say that about the guarantees. We have to believe in the guarantees, like the person who is given the guarantees, right? So then those who are given the guarantee, they have to believe in that. So they. And third thing, our enemies have to believe in the guarantees. Of course, those who are now having war against us, and others also, those who are in line with them, like Northern Korea, for example, or it might be somebody else in the end result. And against these three things that have to be rational, right? Talking about some guarantees, it's a bad story. And it doesn't matter what is the legal form of the document. And I am not a lawyer, so I can be cynical, you know. Thank you very much. Yeah, please. Just to add to what you've said, so still I'm coming back to the provision of Budapest Memorandum about the prohibition of economic pressure on Ukraine after gas wars, milk wars have that we used to have Russia against Ukraine. Nobody thought of Budapest Memorandum. Well, I wanted to ask Mr. Valery. It's a very easy question, actually. Well, because was there a window of opportunities, for example, in 2014, to switch to the issue of either re-signing of the memorandum or some amendments or some new memorandum? What is your point of view? Well, as far as I like the international law, and I used to be the diplomat. I will say that the form, indeed, doesn't play the main role, especially if somebody is not gonna perform that. The example is a very brief document signed by the USA with the Korean Republic. I think 11 points there, and it ensures to Republic of Korea reliable safety guarantees, right to like nuclear. And I don't remember the year as of today, but I think it was like 1984 or something like that. Only one point was changed since then, and it's very brief, and that's it. So both the USA and they are sticking to that. So again, so it should be either like the pact or something else that agreements have to be stick to. So you take the text and it is written, yeah? What partners are telling us? There are no our obligations. Okay, it says black on white that you cannot cause economic pressure. You cannot blackmail the country. What else is needed? You know, and then there are countries, well, in the LF, if they go to the pharmacy and take the medicine, they will insist on that it's a recipe, right? They need the recipe. And here in official letters, they are treating it differently. So who is interpreting also international treaties? Okay, who is interpreting that? Because, again, it's the control, international. According to international law, everything is written there in line with international law. And when you have the rules that you don't want to stick to in the future, like you sit with them at the table and you know that they are not going to do that. So that is where we should start. How do we ensure that there should be some mechanism, material, real mechanism for insurance? Like ensuring, like we do that and you take us to NATO, for example, where they provide some wider amount of obligations. But you see, NATO is saying like fifth article or not, but there are some movements. And like the Italian planes were taken to Estonia, etc., like dislocated to Estonia. So we should not think about the document, I would say, but about material or kind of material base, and also the consequences if that is violated. We need to ensure that somehow, right? Well, okay, today's situation with Budapest Memorandum, this situation has to be an argument in our negotiations regarding guarantees of safety. So I don't understand why our delegation that is negotiating is not using this element in negotiating with Americans. There is some explanation. I am explaining that to myself. Like the things that you gave away are not interested to anybody anymore. How can you bring it to discussion? But we can do that. So the peace won't be built in Ukraine when signing agreement with the USA. Russia won't stop. That has to be the forum with the system of European safety. It will not even be determined by Donald Trump. And when in the context with European and world safety, Ukraine has to remind about itself. Like, yeah, now we don't have some material tools in our hands, but still we have the international law. This is strengthening. Who needs that? Russia? No. Just back in 2012, economically, they were causing pressure on us. But why didn't we address the Budapest Memorandum? Because we did not have, we had some violations from both sides because we were coming on, bilateral documents with Russia and also gas agreements. Again, bilateral agreements. We didn't come to the level of nuclear threats at that moment. And when Russia destroyed that, I think 2014. That was ruined. Then the third attempt, they were trying to violate our sovereignty, and then I think the note was also around there. And Russia actually mentioned that they won't do that themselves, so the price is huge. So those who want to do that, well, the Great Britain and USA, they don't say no to that. We should remind not to Donald Trump, but to taxpayers of the USA that hundreds, billions of dollars they saved because those missiles were not directed to America anymore. So another question is, well, again, who and why did it, etc. But actually, Ukraine was disarmed. And if Ukraine would have said no, there would have been no disarmament of no kind. But we need to, well, I don't like these scenarios, in historical context, how would it would have been if, and blah, blah, blah. So one of the last agreements is coming to an end about the disarmament. So it's I think on 5th of February or something like that. And Russians are actively using that. You see, they want to talk to Americans about that. And where are we? So, of course, we are not in there, but where are our initiatives on the countries that don't want dissemination of nuclear weapons? You know what we have to say? We have to take the initiative that USA and Russia and other countries are bringing world towards the catastrophe. Russia primarily is weaponing. USA is playing along with them. And now we feel just more danger because we are blackmailed with nuclear weapons and we have to bring to accountability them. We need to take Turkey, I don't know, European countries, other European countries, or we need to talk about the joint nuclear armor with the European countries, like we need to protect ourselves somehow, but now we are falling out of diplomatic track. And the system of nuclear, like of weapons of mass destruction, I think that this is where we are failing as of now. And another important moment, I would like to stop on that and underline one more time, the lesson of history, right? How materially secure the American agreement with the Republic of Korea is. Systems of air defense more powerful than Patriot located there. And just like the warning about launching rockets, availability of additional opportunities written in case of if a southern part of Korea is attacked. Fleet, air carriers, how the weapon is used, etc. All of that has clear plans. So we don't have nothing like that about Ukraine. And again, location of their military units, military base. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but we are in such a situation that, the presence of foreign troops in our territory won't be bad. Not just Russian, of our enemy, but those who, according to the UN Charter, should have created the coalition just like it was in Korea in order to force the aggressor to accountability. I think we have to take into account three moments. First of all is that the document itself, no matter what is the form of the document, and I can just agree with colleagues, it has to be supported materially somehow with the troops, with certain things, right? Not just papers. Second thing is that it should not be at the end of the process. There should be understanding straight away, even up to the moment that not like Ukraine is forced to do that and then nothing. And the third thing, the history is now in such a point where those who consider themselves to be great nuclear states, we see that the power of the strong is determining that, and we don't want to have such a division in the world. And in this sense, our diplomacy is now, I don't see like some ideas. I can see the ideas. Okay, Mr. Ilha, I would like to clarify with you. Violation of Budapest Memorandum. Can it be the legal basis for reparations? Well, we are not talking about reparations now. And the reasons for reparations of damage caused by the military aggression of Russia since 2014, well, that is the fact of armed aggression. And we have that in the article of responsibility of countries for illegal actions. There are other documents that are talking about that more clearly, the issue of reparations, etc. Well, it's always a very painful issue for us. Who's going to pay for all of that, for a violation of all the international agreements and treaties, etc. This process is going on today, and if I'm not mistaken, that we should have an agreement with the Council of Europe. Under the Council of Europe, there is a resource and reparation of damages caused by Russian aggression, and it is very good the Ukrainians insisted on including the losses or the harm caused since 2014. Now that is happening. And it's not according to Budapest Memorandum, again. It's the fact of violation by Russia. So the armed aggression of Russia that they committed, 33 and 32, I think, articles on responsibility of states for international legal actions. And if possible, I'd like to add also to the previous things, because now Ukrainian were experts. I'm not an expert, but I won't say is that right or wrong, but they are saying that on the battlefield, Ukraine is now sticking to the inertia strategy. That is not offering some plans from our side, and not taking the initiative, is not offering some ideas from our point of view, but just are getting some number of weapons that we are getting and getting like status quo in the strategy of being, again, inertia. I don't know whether it's correct or not on the battlefield, but in foreign policy, I see this inertia where Ukraine should have say its word, where Ukraine should have said or offered own agreement, own document, own solution, and just help the strong countries face even the countries that are like interested in shortening the nuclear weapons, because since 2012 these agreements, they are losing their power. Ukraine is not doing anything with that. So in foreign policy, we have to do something with that. Now I would like to come to maybe the final question to each of you. I prepared some questions, and let us start with Pavlo Klimkin. Can you please tell one mistake of Ukrainian diplomats regarding the Budapest that we cannot repeat when forming potential guarantees of safety? Not aim to have the legal formulation of any document. Is that like the obligation, guarantee, or whatever it is, that is try to get first ratification, and second try to get what's gonna be, as a matter of fact, I don't know, the collateral, the guarantee of the obligations. I mean, for us to understand that no matter how that is called, even if it is called like poetry on the topic of safety, but actions should be first, and then in parallel form of the document. It's not a crucial thing, but it should be mandatory, and that plays a big role. Okay. Olha, tell us, please, what it should be, the memorandum, agreement, what legal form. I don't quite agree that we can limit with the legal document here. Those have to be also some physical guarantees. In addition to that, maybe some foreign military units maybe being here, and also participation or membership of Ukraine in NATO or other alliances or unions that will ensure Ukrainian safety. We won't be okay with one document. It should be not just the one document. It should be the document on creation of the system of safety in European region. I'm not talking about the universal one even, and the proper reforms of the UN, but it's not one document about Ukraine as well, but it should be supported by some actions. Yeah, and Mr. Valeri, what is the format of guarantees that is nowadays most realistic? Realistic. Yeah, the most realistic one. Listen, should I tell you the truth? Yeah, I can. Empty, unrealistic document, if we are talking. The one that we want? Yeah, tell us, please. The one that we want. Give us at least some optimism, Well, the desired document is the one that is coming with the understanding of the situation in the world today, not as an issue of Ukrainian and Russian war, but the issue of destruction of European system of safety. When Russians are talking about that it should happen, they are right in one thing, that this safety is destroyed, but they are the tool for destruction. But how do we build that from scratch? Well, Russian war against Ukraine is just part of the problem. It's our biggest problem. But the ultimatum was sent to Brussels and Washington. So in my opinion, the biggest problem is that we don't have even a discussion in Europe that they have to take the obligation, not just help Ukraine with weapons or as a partner support. They should take the obligation for this new system of safety. not from Lisbon to Vladivostok, because I think it was a huge mistake, and it still exists. And again, Russia is considered the country that guarantees safety. I understand that Russia plays some role, but I am sorry, how many times can we make the same mistake? Russia is an Asian country. We have to take responsibility for Europe, Germany, France, Ukraine, Poland, not Russia, which is coming to China. They have selected their path. They plan to change their capital. So, I don't have the response about the real, because real is created by us, and we are discussing today some basic principles, and those who are negotiating, they are trying to get the maximum benefits. But basic understanding, I think we mentioned that already, and everybody agreed. Protecting our country and Ukraine. First priority, safety. If we stick to that, then we will have something in the future. Next moment, the peace won't come via the pauses, etc. These basic things have to be changed. Again, as Russians are saying, like basic things in this war, well, it's not the things that they are talking about. Basic things is the country that undertook the obligations, just like France, Great Britain, etc., etc. They destroyed that first. By the way, development of peace, first, like deputy nowadays, she said, well, she praised Ukraine. We are in a good relationship with her, and Pavlo knows her perfectly well. She praised Ukraine, and she did a lot for us, and that was in 2014. She said, that's very right, because the process of nuclear disarmament has started, and the USA will engage in disarmament as well. But now many years have passed. We need to understand how do we survive as non-nuclear countries in this world, and we have to understand how, not the guarantees of safety, but how do we kind of cope with the attempts to limit us in our sovereignty. The number of our army, 600,000, 800,000, it's about nothing. We can determine that ourselves. We have no right to agree for this, because if there was an agreement about the troops in Europe, well, then it should also limit Russia and their army. That is, we have to take the question, it is already de facto taken to that, because not just Russian-Ukrainian war, it's European war that has started, because it's coming from hybrid to certain with operations in the air, on the sea, and on land. Now we are in the phase where we are switching to regional European war, and our task now is to make everyone in Europe move and say that it's gonna be too late. Let us resolve our issues today. So I agree that we can't sign just one agreement and that's it. No, it's a whole process that's gonna last for years. And Ukraine has to get out of this very complicated historical period, not only as a sovereign and independent country, but without those skeletons, in our wardrobe that won't allow us in the future, like when we cope with this, where we want to be able to develop as a center of regional development, as a country that, has some prospects. It's a set of issues that, it starts today. I will say it this way. And again, there will be some negotiations like in Moscow and somewhere else with Russians. Yeah? Let us get rid of the illusions. Russia won't do anything if they don't want to. The regime that they have, Soviet school, in the worst case, they just won't do that. Americans, let us be honest. Donald Trump, half a year ago, he said one thing, then half a year later, he's saying different things. And we can see their priorities, nowadays, and we are not really present in there. So let us take realities into account. Not what we want to see, but what is real. And we don't wait while others will decide instead of us. Even if we don't have the strongest position on the front line, I think that lately, what is also the problem, I will say that, because today's discussion shows that, again, we are communicating even beyond such events, but I have some ideas, I have some additional assessments. And when even the president's office or the Ministry for External Affairs, when were they assessing some estimates? Well, I offer just at least to have the discussion in Ukraine regarding the priorities and safety, because it seems that, we have war, but I don't want to go far, but it seems to me that we are living in parallel worlds. In one world, we repeat the same mistakes from the 90s, and in the other world, we are calling our partners and encouraging our partners to joint responsibility. It has to come to an end. There should be some realistic assessment, but not like you are asking, about that, but real scenario. There's a lot of scenarios. It depends on what scenario we can ensure, and you will always be asked about your opinion, how that will end. And I think that every day, you hear that perfectly well, every day, right? So you see how different, fortune tellers and others, they are not talking about that. They can speak 1 year up front, but hardly 1 week up front. I am happy that we have more Klimkin, more Charlie in the broadcasts, and I like to see Ms. Olha here. I thank you so much for this wonderful discussion, and I truly hope that it was useful. Any other questions? Yeah, you just need to take the microphone in order to speak. Hi, my name is Pedro Canada. You were mentioning the militaries. I'm a military diplomat, mission Ukraine for NATO. The colonel and of the staff office of armed forces. Thank you very much, Mr. Valeri, for again raising this important topic just like 1 year ago. So as for realities, we start with a memorandum. I agree that it is the legal document that, and those who are working both with NATO and the security policy in Ukraine, we don't really start that, because 1997, this document is written to the Charter on Special Partnership between Ukraine and NATO, which is legally binding document. And you remember that in 1999, again, the summit in Washington, the NATO membership action plan adopted, where clearly it says, black on white, that the Charter on Distinguished Partnership between NATO and Ukraine is NATO access. That is the first thing. But even now, our ambassador in Brussels, she's a specialist on the EU Union, not the NATO. So she has to rely on the mission of Ukraine to NATO. There are colonels who know what we are talking about. The priorities, again, I fully agree with that, but read the Constitution, our Constitution, 1996. Powers of the Cabinet of Ministers, safety is on the 10th place. But just like Mr. Valeri has mentioned, and he made his efforts when we were amending the Constitution, and we wrote the strategic goal is for Ukraine to have the membership in the EU, and also, again, being the treaties. So we adopted that, and what the Cabinet of Ministers should do in order to ensure safety, and then according to the text, just like the last 10th point, to put it as first and expand. Next, as for the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, read on the website of Verkhovna Rada, framework document, Partnership for Peace. Inside of that, it says that the signees have the following understanding, and this understanding is mentioned just like in our Budapest Memorandum. However, the translation, the last point, it says that NATO and partner countries are jointly developing the doctrines doctrines is translated as, again, strategies, doctrines, etc. So the young translator and the Ministry for Foreign Affairs, they will develop military doctrine of Ukraine. Here we are. And the point where it says that each country partner is preparing themselves to participation in NATO-led operations, they wrote to participation in international peace-building UN operations. Thank you. So maybe everything that is done in Crisis Media Center, maybe somebody will listen in the government, in the office of the president, and they will recall also, like the last thing mentioned by Ms. Oleha, actions of the military. So 2 years ago, the president has signed the order on implementation of innovations into preparation or training of armed forces in order to lose less people. In 2 years, there was a pilot project implemented. The concept was signed by Syrskyi on creation of experimental unit that now is going through the probation. On the front line, they are killing orcs and they are not losing our people. However, some Russian person brought a document to Syrskyi and they want to kill all of that. If you're interested, I can send all of that to you. It's public information and it is on YouTube. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak. Thank you very much, dear colleagues. It was very nice and interesting for me.